the idea of committing genocide or whatever. Malthusianism is an economic theory, and it is the primary economic theory of the British Empire, and it has been for a long time. And I mean, it started in the late 1700s. There was a British economist who wrote a text called The Principle of Population, where he argued that the French Revolution was caused by overpopulation. And he was pointing to an aspect of feudalism that was kind of true, right? Is that feudalism is a system where, you know, you can't really expand to a higher level of development. And feudalism does have an issue with the fact that you know, people breed faster than the feudal system can produce food. So he was pointing to something true about feudalism. And then he projected that onto all of human history. And he said, oh, the problems of the world are due to a term he invented called overpopulation. Now, he was talking about feudalism and the French Revolution. He's saying, why are all these people dying in the French Revolution? He said, oh, that's because there were too many people in France. The French feudal system couldn't feed them all. And then he proposed measures to keep the population low to prevent things like the French Revolution from ever happening. It was pretty awful. And it wasn't acknowledging that the French feudal system was very awful. It was just, you know, French feudalism was fine. It's just there were too many people. So if we just artificially keep the population low, things like the French Revolution will never happen. Well, he was missing a key reality, which was that France was still a feudal country at that time. Britain, where he was living, had been through the English Civil War and had adopted the capitalist system. Right. And that capitalism and feudalism are very different from each other. And he didn't even really acknowledge the difference between capitalism and feudalism. He just said, look, sometimes the population gets too high, and that's a problem. So he proposed in this essay very repugnant efforts to court the return of the plague in order to keep poor people down, you know, all kinds of things to do to keep low-income people from reproducing. That's what he argued. Now, that was Robert Malthus and this concept of overpopulation. Then, you know, I think maybe almost a century later, you have Charles Darwin. And Charles Darwin was a follower of Malthus. He was a Malthusian because that was the primary view among British rich people, is that there's too many people in the world. And if the poor people breed too much, there's, you know, that's a problem. And that, you know, that if there's too many poor people, they'll revolt. And you started at this point to see capitalist crises of overproduction. So Charles Darwin came along and he came up with his understanding of biology, which, you know, it was the beginning of understanding evolutionary biology. And you can argue, I'm not here to argue science with anybody. I think that a lot of his science was genuinely correct, but he presented it with a bias, right? He himself was a British Empire Malthusian and a racist. And that the way he presented his theories, almost immediately you got this term survival of the fittest, right? Which I guess some people say Charles Darwin never actually used the term survival of the fittest, but survival of the fittest. Darwin argued that some species are more likely to reproduce than others because they have some kind of trait that is winning. But immediately the phrase survival of the fittest became adopted by the British Empire. And they argued that in the name of modern science, some races are superior to others, and that the problems of the world are when the unfit are allowed to breed. And that's what they argued. Now, that's not what Darwin argued. Darwin said fitness, according to Charles Darwin, is your ability to produce fertile offspring, right? That's all it is. So as long as you can produce fertile offspring, you are fit. And those who are the most fit are those who produce the most fertile offspring. Now, that's not what the British Empire meant. They meant the best, right? And you know, this concept of natural selection that came from Darwin, you know, it immediately got adopted by the British Empire as a propaganda tool. And it was the Rockefeller family, the wealthy oil banking family in America. They launched an institution called the Neo-Malthusian Society. And the Neo-Malthusian Society took Robert Malthus's concept of overpopulation and social Darwinism, this kind of British Empire racist supremacist interpretation of human, of human society, and combined them into kind of a new synthesis that was at the time called neo-Malthusianism. And neo-Malthusianism argued that the problems of capitalism were caused by overpopulation, and that in the name of the good of society, poor people needed to be exterminated. That's what they believed, that the problems, capitalism was breaking down because people were homeless, because there were too many houses, people were hungry because there was too much food. And the neo-Malthusian society said the way to resolve this problem is to exterminate poor people. And that was the neo-Malthusian society funded by the Rockefeller family. What was going on is that starting in 1825, every few years, the capitalist system broke down in a crisis of overproduction, or a value crisis. And, we'll show this film. I can't show it enough times because this concept is important to understand. Human labor is the source of all wealth. Machines reduce the role of human labor in technology. As a result, workers cannot buy the products that they are producing.